Hey Rebels, my name is Matthew Barton, and I'm the host of the Rebellion Brewing Podcast. In the last few years, new breweries have been opening, while others are expanding or changing their business model entirely as they grow and evolve. Saskatchewan is changing a lot. Saskatoon has seen some of the biggest changes, and frankly, I haven't been able to keep up. That's why I'm glad to introduce you to Kevin Brown. He works with and for 21st Street Brewing in Saskatoon, and he has his finger on the pulse of the city's craft beer scene. If new beers are released in Saskatoon, I can count on him to have a pretty informed opinion. He's also the founder of the Beer Lovers of Saskatchewan Facebook page, which is one of the best places to find out what's happening with Saskatchewan beer. I've been bugging him to come on the show for a while, so it only took 102 episodes to get here. Let's get into it. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
How's it going?
It's going great. I've been in Regina for a couple of days now for my daughter's soccer tournament, and anytime I'm here, I always avail myself of the fantastic breweries and beer drinking establishments that your city has to offer.
So it's been soccer and beer.
Soccer and beer. That's my life. That's my golden ticket. Yeah.
That's life lived well.
Absolutely.
Tell me your background with craft beer. How long have you been involved in the craft beer scene?
Oh man. So when I moved to Canada 20 years ago, I started drinking Molson Canadian because, well, it was Canadian, and I thought maybe that would be the thing to do. And then went on to Labatt and drank a ton of really not beers I wouldn't drink now. Let's say beers I wouldn't drink now. And then I started drinking Sleeman Honey Brown and started to develop, tastes that were a little bit closer to the stuff that I used to drink back in UK. And then started drinking, when SLGA started to bring in more things like Innocent Gun and some of those kind of weird, wild, exotic beers, I would drink those. And from there, I sort of realized that there was this brewery in Saskatoon, Paddockwood. And so I started buying, 606, Checkmate, Black Cat, all those, the different, so the pioneer beers in Saskatchewan, and getting a taste for those and sort of expanding my palate a little bit. From there, I would say that the big moment in my craft beer evolution was hooking up with a guy on Untapped, the beer drinking app, who gave me a friend request, and I was like, I don't know this guy. I don't know whether I want to accept this. But he had a whole bunch of cool check-ins from breweries that I kind of knew peripherally about, Stone Brewing and, Goliath and all these places. So I accepted a friend request, and he said, hey, man, I'm in Saskatoon too, and there's not a ton of craft beer guys. Do you want to get together? So I was like, yeah, but I'm going to do this in a public space because I don't know who this guy is. So we went to Winston's and we had a beer, and he invited me to his place for a beer share, and I met a whole bunch of people there, and that was my entry into, okay, this is a much bigger world than I realized. It's not just Paddockwood, and there's this whole panoply of tastes and flavors and styles and breweries and the Belgian thing and everything else, and that kind of opened my eyes to it. So that was my entry into it.
What was his name?
Tim Thiessen.
Okay, I know Tim.
Yeah, Tim. So Tim used to bring in. He had a lot of contacts in the States, and he brought in Heady Topper. He sold me a 4-pack of Heady Topper, which most people I think know that it's one of the sort of benchmark New England IPAs from out east, and blew my mind because it was sort of, okay, well, hops don't have to be bitter; they can be really fruity, and so you sort of, that curiosity that is innate in me is sort of, well, if they can do that with hops, I mean, what else they can do with it? And if you can do that with yeast, what else can you do? So it was sort of a passion grew out of just wondering, well, why did I not know about this before? Why did I assume beer all tasted like, Canadian and Labatt and everything? And the beers I drank back in the UK were all English bitters, which all taste pretty much the same. There's not a whole bunch of difference between those beers. To be exposed to the extent, then you get lambics and you get sours and you get all these things. It was a bit overwhelming, but it was like, oh man, I really want to get into this. And there's alcohol in it, which makes for a good time if you're with the right people and you're in the right environment. So that was my way in.
Was Tim's guys, were those the home brewers? Some of those guys?
No, Tim wasn't. He was never a home brewer. He was just more a beer enthusiast, and he had those contacts. So he would arrange beer shares at his place he used to live in Warman. And so that's when I met Casey Murray, the current brewmaster at 21st Street, and Chris Klein, who's a big beer guy you would know from the Beer Lovers group, and also a phenomenal musician in Saskatoon. And met those guys and sort of started going to Winston's to do these bottle shares where people would just bring in, whatever Chris travels a lot for work, so he would bring in beers from Toppling Goliath and Almanac and all these different places and things. I had no context for that at that time. And then Casey would bring in stuff that he used to homebrew a lot, so he'd bring in his meads and he would bring in these barrel strength things. And Flanders, the first Flanders I had was one of Casey's. And then Chris Beavis, the senator at Winston's, he would bring out bottles because he travels a lot too. And we'd all just sit down and then you get this weird thing where you're starting to talk about beer now. And it's like, well, I'm smelling this and I'm tasting that. And to me, it was sort of, well, it tastes good, but I don't know that I can express exactly what I'm tasting. So learning that side of it and enriching my sort of experience of flavor and drinking beers was cool. Like it gave me a new feather in your bow, and it was super cool.
You started to pick up some of the language of craft beer?
For sure, yeah. And I still wonder sometimes whether when you're describing a beer, you think, am I just kind of parroting things? But well, no, I think I have enough vocabulary now and enough of an understanding of flavor profiles that I can talk somewhat intelligently about them, but not always. I mean, and I always defer to guys like Mark Heisey and Casey and those guys who are BJCP level taste buds to say, okay, yeah, no, that's actually it's phenyl acids or it's this or whatever it is. I don't have quite that level of thing, but I know I can pick out a flavor here and there.
I think it's important to remain humble.
Of course,
but,
yeah.
Often Mark will just hand me a beer without telling me.
Yeah.
And he'll quiz me. Tell me what you taste. Tell me what you smell. And as I start to pick things out, he'll either nod his head or shake his head. And if I get it right, he's like, yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
And he's like, maybe keep going. He's very patient with me.
But I find that with the craft beer scene, and especially the brewers and the owners of these breweries, they're not about setting themselves up on a pedestal to be the experts. They want to be educators. They want to teach people about the thing that they love and get everyone else as passionate about craft beer and about the process and about the sort of the benefits to the local economy and those kinds of things as they are. And so when you speak to Jeff Allport from Nokomis or Mark or Casey or any of these guys, you learn so much if you just sit back and let them tell you their experience and give you this information. I find that massively beneficial because it enhances your experience with that product.
I guess I want to step back a bit.
Yep.
The reason you were doing bottle shares is, I'm going to guess, because it was so hard to get those beers.
Yeah, so I remember listening to it's so surreal being on the Rebellion podcast because I'm a huge fan. And so listening to the episode when Mark was talking about, the stuff that we get in Saskatchewan is typically tier 2 stuff. It's the stuff that the breweries, it's either the regular beers that they churn out, or they can't sell in different markets, and we get it secondhand, and it's 6 months old or 8 months old, and it's not been stored properly, and everything else, right? So,
deeply frustrating.
Deeply frustrating, and also, I've lost my train of thought completely. I'm going to back off. So the question was, give me the question again.
We were talking about bottle sharing and why we had to do it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So the whole idea behind bottle sharing is people bringing in really good beers that are renowned. So an example would be Pliny the Elder, or Pliny, as I suppose it's pronounced Pliny in Canada. Pliny the Elder from Russian River. So that was the double IPA that started everything on the West Coast, right? And so you get that beer in, and someone's got that, and they're excited to share it. So they want to share that with their friends and talk about, okay, well, I think it tastes like this, and to me it reminds me of this, and what we're doing in the province or what we're doing in Canada doesn't match this because of X, Y, and Z. So I think it's that educational part, but it's also that part of craft beer that really is grounded in community. Drinking a beer on your own is great, and especially if it's a great beer, but drinking it with someone you can talk about it with, I think that's a different experience. And so the bottle share idea was, let's bring these weird, unique beers, whatever we can find, and let's talk about them. Let's learn something, especially when you've got people who have really good palates or they're BJCP judges, and you can learn something from that and sort of enrich your own experience of it. That was what I wanted out of it, and that's what I got out of it. So
the way you guys talk about the bottle shares is how I hear my vinyl music friends talk about collecting vinyl records.
Yeah.
It's the same energy.
It's nerd. It's a nerd thing, right? I mean, it's the same with anything. If you're super passionate about anything, like I don't care about cars. But if you get a bunch of people who are talking about engines and V8s and I don't know Hemis and these kinds of things, you can't help but get caught up in it because it's the passion that comes across, right? So I like that. I like people who are passionate about things. I like artists. I like people who tradesmen. I like watching a really good tradesman. So that whole thing of this is my bag. I want to tell you everything I know about it. In, like you said, in a humble way, and making sure that you're trying to bring people in and not sort of set yourself up as the expert. It's that to me it's really engaging. I really enjoy that, And the craft beer community is just full of those people.
One of the things I've noticed is that we don't need to do bottle shares anymore. It feels like the scene has evolved, and now we don't have to travel. You should probably come here and get to taste our beer.
Yeah, for sure. I talked to you a little bit off, when we were setting this thing up about my process for talking about anything in any substantive ways. I make a hideous amount of notes and pare it back. And that was one of the things that I'd written down. When you first get into craft beer in Saskatchewan 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, there's one player in town, it's Paddock Wood, and then you had Bushwhacker and Regina, and there was nothing else. And so then Cava Wines in Saskatoon and Ingredients in Saskatoon started bringing in Belgian beers and things like, Rogue beers, which I don't drink anymore, but Rogue beers and these kinds of, these exotic, different beers and things from New Zealand. And so you kind of get head up in always chasing that wild and wonderful beer. But now I would say my buying is 95 to 98% local because we make such killer beer here in every single style. So we got a world-class sour. Was it bronze medal at the World Beer Awards?
We're entering it again. We're gonna try and get another medal.
Yeah, and no doubt you will. And we've got, I posted this in the Beer Lovers group that it seems like every month, at least one of the breweries in the province makes a beer that just makes you. This is brewed in Saskatchewan, really? Like, how the hell is this possible? So you don't need to look outside of it, and it's fresher. And it's local, and it's often using local ingredients, and the money stays in the province, and there's just no downside to that. But just from a flavour perspective, we make better beer here than I travel enough for work across Canada that I'm always sort of disappointed and looking forward to getting back home. But I think, well, okay, yeah. There's the guys out in Toronto. Who's the big brewery in Toronto?
Steam Whistle?
Oh, no, the crap. Bellwoods. Bellwoods. They do some really great stuff, and there's Four Winds in BC, and there's a few of the bigger breweries that you think, yeah, these guys are nailing it, and certain styles like Four Winds have the sours, they've got them nailed. But I don't think there's anyone in Canada who's doing a better job than the breweries in Saskatchewan of covering the gamut of styles and consistent quality. I really don't. I think we're just absolutely killing it, especially for the population we have and the number of breweries we have, which is still really low, and we've not even scratched the surface of what's possible, so...
Breweries per capita were much lower than Alberta, but it seems more sustainable. We're not seeing some of the crazy stuff that's happening in Calgary and Edmonton. That's just not happening here in Saskatchewan. But specifically, I wanted to kind of do a deep dive on Saskatoon. What is the scene like now for Saskatoon?
It's, again, if I rewind to 8, 9 years ago, Paddock Wood opened the Woods Ale House in downtown, right? And Winston's already had they were doing craft beer, but they were mainly doing imports. So it was this thing where a few people, there was a lot of expats, a lot of people who weren't actually originally, they weren't born here, and they wanted the lager, the German lager, or they wanted a Leffy or whatever it might be. And so that was kind of the craft beer scene was very, very small. And it was also, it seemed to be pretty limited to people who were craft beer nerds, the mustache wax and corduroy, 90% corduroy. That was the scene, for the most part. And that's generalizing, but that was kind of where it was at. Fast forward to now, and when you look around either the 21st Street Tap Room, High Key, or you go to Prairie Sun, you'll see, 80-year-olds, there's kids in there. I mean, they're not drinking beer, but there's blue-collar workers. There's the whole gamut now. It's starting to realize that beer tastes good. Whenever if someone says to me, I don't like beer, it's like, no, you don't like American light lagers. That's what you don't like, because that's what you think beer is. And I think that switch in Saskatoon definitely has been focused on, it's a broadening of the market, right? So we're not just focusing on, we're not selling to craft beer drinkers anymore. Now we're selling to everyone. And it's the same thing Rebellion's done a good job of with the Cerveza and the Blast Off. In Saskatoon, Maddie and Dan at High Key have done a good job with their Kolsch. We have our Sweetly dry hop blonde at 21st Street. There's beers now that are really accessible for people who they're not hopheads, they don't want a stout, they don't want barrel, they don't, if your palate isn't expanded enough to be able to handle that, and you just want something that tastes like a beer, those beers exist now, but they're made with local ingredients. There are no preservatives in them. You're not going to get a banging headache the next day because, they exist
they're not
now.
infected.
Exactly. So they exist now. And so that, like I said, that broadening of the market, I think, is the most significant thing that I've seen. And then the emergence of some of these tap rooms now. So Shelter does a great job. You go into Shelter, the atmosphere in there is fantastic. It's very casual and low key and just, it's a cool place to hang out.
It's like warm and lots of rich wood, and it smells good because they got tacos.
Absolutely, and their tacos are fantastic, by the way. You should always eat their tacos at Hikey. And Winston's, we have the advantage, 21st Street, we have the advantage of, we've got this bricks and mortar that was already there, and people kind of know that Winston's is a beer place. So you've got that automatic.
How many taps do you guys have at Winston's?
Oh, Winston's is, I'm gonna get this wrong, but it's at least 70. I think 72, 76 upstairs.
How do you even make a decision when you got 72 taps?
Well, thankfully you don't necessarily have to, because you've got so much space. And the good thing that Chris Beavis has done is he slowly and gradually whittled down the big beers that he puts on tap. So I think there's only about 4 or 5. Maybe around there that are actually sort of corporate owned breweries. Everything else is independently owned breweries, which is so cool, right? I mean,
I don't want to name names, but I know that we've talked to some of the restaurants and pubs in Saskatoon, and one of the guys came to us and he goes, "I'm only going to carry local Saskatchewan craft beer now." He's like, "I'm cutting out all the big guys." He's like, they're not worth my time. The sales aren't there. He's like, "I'm only going to support local." And then another guy, he's like, "Nah, maybe I'll have one craft beer from Saskatchewan," and he only wants to have the rest is big beer. And we look at that and it's a strange dichotomy of these two restaurants, two pubs, essentially competing for the same audience in Saskatoon with an entirely different attitude.
So the question is that where that dichotomy
it's
comes
not
from,
a great question. It's a terrible question. It's more of an observation.
Yeah.
Do you think restaurants get it now? Do you think pubs get it? Are they all about craft beer? Or is it still a slog?
I think that the smart business owners, because, at the end of the day, a restaurant is a business, and people have got to keep the lights on, they have to pay their staff, they've got to put bums in seats, all that's got to go on. So they do have to look at, okay, what is my clientele? I think my clientele is a bunch of 20-year-old frat boys who just watched Animal House. Most likely you're not going to bring in a lambic, right? Because that's just not going to hit that market. So we all understand that. But I do think the creep is towards that people are seeing that while the trend in the province is that beer sales are going down, craft beer sales are going up at a disproportionate rate. So I think it's smart business for the people who are paying attention in those restaurants and in those tap room breweries. In those restaurants and in those pubs to say, well, we should at least have 2 or 3 options, or live music venues is another one, right? So there's the shift culturally, which we talked about earlier. But on the business side, I think it's just that recognition that, okay, if beer sales are going down, we need to keep our revenues up. Craft beer's increasing and doing better. So again, the smart businesses, the people who are paying attention to that kind of thing, recognize that. So it can be somewhat cynical in a way, where they're really just looking at the bottom line, which is fine because that still benefits our community. But there is also that recognition that, okay, maybe this is a cool thing. This is local. You guys have the lentil. So if we can time with the farmers, and agriculture is a huge thing in Saskatchewan, if you can use that and you can leverage that and say, or Maker's Malt out in Rostown, if we can say that this the grain in this beer is exclusively 100% Saskatchewan. It was grown 90 miles from here. It was shipped in. It was milled. It was, all this kind of stuff went on, and now it's in your glass. I think more and more people are starting to recognize that there's some potential in selling that to people and explain to people that there's value beyond the flavor and beyond the ones and zeros, that there's value just in building our own Saskatchewan brand in that. Which we're famously, Saskatchewan people don't like bragging about what we have when we're the best in the world. Our crops are the best in the world. Our beer is very close to the best in Canada. So I think that people are starting to see that, I think.
It's funny you bring that up because I was talking to a brewer last week, and he was saying it's getting harder and harder to buy Saskatchewan barley because the Americans, they come in, they got a fat bankroll, they got purchasing power, and they're thirsty. And they're buying up all the grain and making it harder for local producers to buy local.
And that's going to be an interesting...
That's how good our farmers are.
Absolutely, and that's going to be interesting, right? In the next sort of 5 to 10 years, as our craft culture continues to grow, how is that going to affect our access to, Maker's Malts, Vienna Malt? We just did a beer with their Vienna Malt, and it's so good. You get this grainy, beautiful, and it gives this beautiful color. And so, but is that going to be a case of them saying, well, Stone Brewing down in the States, it's a craft brewery and they make great beer, but they're willing to buy everything we make and give us 15% above what we can make. Is that going to be enough to sway them to sell everything down to the States? Well, I think that, and I hope that, the sort of the expanded beer community, which includes farmers and it includes a whole bunch of different people, can see the value in keeping it local. However, it might change the landscape. That's going to be an interesting thing to see develop, I think.
It's interesting that you bring that up again, because we consciously have to make that decision even ourselves as a brewery. We had, in the beginning, a very small footprint, very few clients and pubs, so we were able to give them that extra service. Hey, you've got 5 of our beers on taps. Let us come in and take care of your lines. Let us come in and swap the kegs out for you and do that kind of extra management, that maintenance. And now we're getting to the point where, well, maybe we can't offer that extra anymore. Or we're having people, retailers are saying, I will buy every single keg that you make of beer X. And we're like, whoa, we still have to get a keg out to the people who have been with us from the beginning. Like Jeff Pearson at the Beefeater. If Jeff wants a keg, we're going to say to Jeff, you're getting a keg. It's not going to be a, sorry, we missed you. We're never going to let anyone miss out just because a big guy came in and said, we'll buy every single drop. What was more of a value to us as a business, as a conscious decision, was to say, we want to ensure everybody who wants some gets some. It's not easier to do. It's harder. It's a lot of extra work, but it's more fair. And we wanted to honor that in the marketplace.
And again, that goes back to, we're broadening this out a little bit from, talk about Saskatoon. We can talk about Saskatoon later. That's fine.
We're talking about Saskatchewan.
Saskatchewan,
I think it's part of our ethos.
100%. And it's that thing that everyone's in this. All the owners of the breweries, they need to make money because they got to keep the lights on. They got to keep people employed. They got to be able to pay benefits. Got to do all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, most of the ones that I know are concerned with being authentic in their approach to dealing with people and being fair and being even-handed in sort of distribution. So yeah, you could sell 100% of your product. Rebellion could sell 100% of its product to one distributor, and you could keep the lights on, and you could keep people employed, and you could keep making the same amount of beer, and you could even grow. But there's that intangible thing that, yeah, but I want everyone to enjoy this beer, or as many people as I can reach to enjoy this beer. And if you get that sort of exclusivity model in your business, then you lose that reach, and then you lose the opportunity to give someone else. And again, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier, the passion for it. So this thing that I love craft beer, and I love the community, and I like what it's done for my life, and I want to bring that to other people. I want to share that with other people. If you distribute to only 1 or 2 or 3 different places, you really lose that. And that's one of the most incredible things that I find about the community. You know, I was just at Pile of Bones, and again, the Rebellion Tap Room too. You've got competitors' beers in your fridge. You're selling your competitors' beers.
Yeah.
You know, when you explain that to people who are not in the craft beer community, like, why would you do that? Why
They
would you
think we're insane.
Yes, they think you're crazy. Like, why would you do that? Well, because we're trying to float all boats, and there's so much space in the market. And even if there wasn't, I still think that the big characters in the craft beer scene here would still do it anyway, because that's just who they are, right? That's what they're about, and that's why they got into this in the first place. It wasn't about zeros and ones. It was about bringing that passion and their hobby or their joy of this thing to as many people as they can.
That's a great way to segue into today's podcast beer. It's one of our friends. It's Black Bridge Brewing. They did a collaboration brew with Rafter R Brewing in Maple Creek, Saskatchewan. Rafter is currently under construction. They're not open yet, but it's being it's owned, and it's going to be controlled by a man named Ryan Moncrief. And he came together with Black Bridge, southwest Saskatchewan. They're going to make great beer. And I haven't tasted this one yet. It's been on our tap room menu for about a week, but I said I'm going to wait. I'm going to have it with you on the podcast.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Cheers, mate.
I guess I should tell people it's the chocolate strong.
And it's got a really, really strong chocolatey nose, like that dark chocolate, and you can smell a bit of that dark chocolate bitterness right in the nose.
It's not as sweet as I thought it would be. It's not like a cloying milk chocolate sweetness. It's like a roasty dark chocolate.
I kind of wonder what the base of this is. Almost like an amber. I would say it's maybe an amber ale or something of that description.
It's a little bit lighter for what I would expect to be a dark beer, but it smells nice. And my first initial taste is really pleasant. It's not cloying at all.
No, not at all. And it's a very dry finish, and so. That's the weird thing about beer sometimes is it smells a lot different to how it tastes, right? When you smell that, you're kind of expecting it's a big stout. You think this is going to have a huge malt backbone. It's going to be thick, chewy. You've got a lot of chocolate in there. There's, that sort of, also like a bit of roasty malt in there, like an oatmeal stout or, or even maybe a sort of an American brown ale. You get that kind of thing. But when you drink it, it's actually quite easy drinking. There's not, I don't know what's the alcohol in this, about 5.5, 6 maybe, or something around there.
I believe it's 6%.
Yeah, it's not.
I wrote it down in my notes, but I've forgotten them.
It's not a huge beer, but it's. I like chocolate. I love chocolate. To my detriment sometimes, certainly detrimental to my waistline at times. I love chocolate. So having that note in there, and it is because it's really quite forward in the nose. It's delicious, but it's not going to put you on your backside, and
I would say this. To me, my perception on the finish would be this is closer to a brown ale than an amber.
Yeah.
The roasty finish is really, really nice.
Yeah, for sure. Just looking at the colour though, right? If you look at that colour, it's quite...
It's brighter.
There's no real opacity in that. Like I can pretty much see you through it almost. Like there's a lot of colour in that, and you can see it. So a brown ale usually is a little bit denser, nitpicking, I suppose, but that's where you get into beer. And this is what, when we go back to callback, we do a callback on our podcast, right? To the whole beer bottle share thing. That's when you start learning to talk about those things too. Well, the colour, it doesn't really matter if it tastes good and it looks crap. That's okay. But when it looks good too, and if you can discern something from the colour, like you said, if you look at that, that's not a stout.
It definitely
right, you can tell it's not a stout. So it gives you some clues about what maybe you're going to taste.
I have total confidence in Clayton to put out a kick-ass beer. Like I got to talk to him at the Craft Beer Fest a couple weeks ago, and I was just laying it on thick. I was just, man, I love your beer, and I love what you're doing with your IPA, and your double IPA was so rad. And he's just so humble. He couldn't even take it. He was just like, I think he just wanted to get away from me because I was just being so obnoxiously effusive. And then his wife standing right there, and she's like, "Oh, you want to talk to me?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, I'll talk to you." But he's like, "No, it's really nice to hear these great things." He's just, I'm a little overwhelmed by the crowd. I'm like, "Oh, okay." But then she's great. She comes up, she's like, "Hey, I'll give you a couple quotes for the podcast."
And that's the thing, right? I mean, Clay, he's that guy who he makes great beer and doesn't. I think maybe just doesn't know it.
He's so humble.
Yeah, and sort of maybe always kind of suspects that I could have done it better. I could have maybe changed this, which is that perfectionist thing. And I think most brewers actually are that way, right? They think, well, I didn't quite get this dialed in where I wanted. It's like, dude, you just made a kick-ass beer. Enjoy it. Sit back. I was talking to Glenn Valgardson from Pile of Bones before I came here. And he took me around the brewery and showed me the new system. And we sat and I said to him, you've got so much going on. You're growing, you're putting in this, you've got distro, you've got the new tap room, you've got all this, you've got to manage staff now, all these things. And I asked him, do you ever just sit back and get time to just sit back and think, man, this is good. Like, this is good. Like, the beer's good, everything. He said, well, no. And I think that's not a failing, sorry. It's a trap that a lot of the people involved in this fall into, because they see the potential and they're always thinking forward, which is great for the rest of us. Us beer drinkers benefit from that, but they should sometimes sit back and take time to think, man, I just made a great beer, or we've just built this amazing community in the Rebellion Tap Room. We have your vinyl nights, or you sometimes just sit back and Jen Muscovy, we were talking earlier about, sit back and just revel in the fact that you're doing an amazing job. And I don't think they do it often enough. And which, like I said, it's good that they're trying to drive things forward rather than looking back and resting on their laurels. But a pat on the back sometimes is warranted for these guys and girls, and I think that they should do it a little bit more often. And Clay's certainly one of those people who should do that.
Okay, not including 21st Street Brewing, who are the other two breweries that people should check out if they're traveling to Saskatoon?
Oh, two? Now you really put me on the spot now.
Yeah. And that's not to say you don't endorse or enjoy the other breweries. It's just to say, maybe you've only got an afternoon and you've only got a couple hours. Who should you hit up?
Okay, I'm going to caveat this.
Okay.
I'm going to say it depends on what you want. Okay. If you're looking for a really great atmosphere to just sit back and enjoy the ambience of a place to sit and drink beer and eat food, Shelter Brewing for sure. And I would go to 9 Mile. Because 9 Mile's over in a district that was traditionally in Saskatoon, a depressed economic area, and 9 Mile had made a conscious decision to go there and try to sort of work with local businesses and breathe some life into that community. I think they did a great job of that. The tap room is excellent. Their beers are great, and they do a good job of welcoming people in and making sure they have a good time.
I'm a big fan of Shelter's NEPA, New England IPA, or what we call a hazy. What beer should you look for at 9 Mile?
9 Mile does a great... So Garrett Peterson, the brewer there, the best beer I think that they've ever done was a foreign export stout, which isn't on that often. But their Bocephus, their white IPA, is a killer beer. I mean, to style, if you want a white IPA and you look it up in the BJCP guidelines, it nails it, absolutely nails it, right? And it's nice and airy and light, and it's not going to crush your palate, and it's a very enjoyable drink to eat to have with food, or to just and then with Shelter, I would say go funky, because they do their gozas and they do a whole bunch of stuff that's just off the wall, and because they have a nano brewery and they're turning over at such a rate that they don't keep things in very long. So good luck getting growler fills of some of their stuff actually at times. Try the funky stuff there. 9 Mile, you're going to get really solid 2-style beers. And at Shelter, you're going to get the stuff that's just going to blow your mind and expand your palate. Yeah.
And when I go to 21st Street Brewing, what should I be looking for?
You should be looking for all of our beers, of course, Matt. So right now, we just released a Belgian Pale Ale. We also have my favorite beer right now that's on tap is the Brett Sunny Day. So that was our Sunny Day, our flagship IPA, which was then aged in barrels with Brettanomyces, which... I went down to Disneyland with my family, and I saw a T-shirt. Some guy had a T-shirt, and it said Brettanomyces was not a dinosaur, which I thought was great. So it's obviously a wild yeast for those who maybe aren't aware of the term. But so it adds a real sort of funky, somewhat unpredictable character to beer. With the Sunny Day, it's really brought the fruit forward. So you just get this fruit explosion in your mouth. Sunny Day was already quite a fruity beer anyway, and we call it a no-coast IPA because it's got a little bit of the West Coast bitterness, but a lot of the New England sort of fruit and haziness to it. Quite hazy, but with the Brett added, it just gives it this whole different dimension, and it's bueno. It's so good.
Brett can be a bit of a pain in the ass to play with, like playing with fire a little bit.
Yeah, honestly, you speak to any brewer, they don't really know what's going to come out the other end. I mean, they can, if they've got experience and they know what strain of bread it is, and they know they've used it before, or they've used that bar where they can predict roughly where they think it might land, but they don't really know. They're just throwing darts at a dartboard from 50 miles away in a fog with dark glasses on, facing backwards. But that's the beauty of craft beer. I think that's the thing that draws a lot of people in, is just, this thing could go any direction. We don't know. Let's all discover what it might do together.
You started the Beer Lovers of Saskatchewan Facebook page. I did want to touch base with you on this because I think it's really interesting. You don't need you don't need to pay a membership. You don't need to know the secret handshake. You just kind of got to click on it and say, hey, I want to join.
So
why did you do it?
To clarify, I didn't start it.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So my friend Chris Klein, who I mentioned earlier on, he was the guy who started it off, and he handed it over to me just because he's a full-time dad and he works, and he's a musician, and he's an absolutely amazing musician. This guy is honestly probably one of the best musicians in this province. So it just ended up being, and it's not a huge job. I mean, as you know, it's not a huge job moderating this page, but he felt that he wanted to inject a bit of life, a different energy into it, and he gave it to me.
The inmates are pretty civil.
Absolutely. We keep them pretty much in check. No, it's, to me, that's the melting pot. That's where you, and especially as a brewery, you need to, if you're not contributing to the conversation, you at least need to be listening to what's going on in there, because there are some very good voices on every single part of the spectrum there. So from people who are just getting into craft beer and they still like Pilsner and they still like, Kokanee but they're interested in what we're doing. And then you've got the guys who, they want a beer that's been cellared for 65 years in a Scottish cave by 3 monks who own an aardvark, and that whole ridiculous thing. The whole mustache, wax and corduroy thing, it's, so everyone's in there, and it's evolved into, I think, we've got this space now where we can all talk about it without being judgmental. And it's sometimes, that's going to happen sometimes, but it's not judgmental. It's pretty welcoming, and it's informative. So everyone knows what's going on in the province, because everyone posts about the new beers that come out. And, some of the stronger contributors will give you tips on what you're tasting and how it was made and who the people involved were, and what the community angle is and all those kinds of things. So it brings people in. And we've lost, you lose a few members who find it's not for them, but we gain members at a rate of probably 50 new members a month, I would say, for the last 2 years or so, something around there. So the community's growing, and it shows us again, when you're asking about where is the craft beer community going, it's growing, and it's growing from non-traditional sources, because more people are getting interested in, well, what is craft beer? What does that even mean?
I try to be fairly conscious of not always shoving rebellion down people's face when I'm participating on the forum. So I'm doing more like craft beer memes, and I'm trying to make puns or jokes, and not be too adsy. I don't want to slap people in the face with all the marketing nonsense, because I'm like, if you're following us on Facebook as a business, you've seen it, and that would be redundant and obnoxious. But I do like to make jokes and have fun with memes that I couldn't share with anyone else. They're specifically for my friends in the craft beer community. And for me, when I hit post, I'm like, oh, fuck, I hope Kevin likes this one. Like, I'm just waiting for you to click like.
Isn't that the horror of social media, though? When your life validation rests on whether someone likes your post. No, there's a good point in there, though, that you try. I mean, and I kind of have that same conundrum. Like, I want to post about all the 21st Street beers because Casey's a great brewer and he makes great beer, and you think, yeah, but I don't want to come off as just pushing one brand. And I also have that weird thing that I'm involved with 21st Street, and I work with them, and I never say I work for them. I work with them, because it is a very collaborative group of people. But I try to be even-handed, and I love Rebellion. I love Pile of Bones. There's so many breweries in the province that are doing great stuff, so I try to be as broad as I can with my posting, and not just ram, because it isn't, like you said. I mean, it's not a platform for businesses to push their product. It's a place where everyone's welcome to share their experiences with craft beer. Now, the people involved with the breweries have a lot to say about craft beer, and they should have their voices heard. And there's nothing wrong with promoting your own brand. Any craft brewer who's not going to push through what they brewed, well, I would be a little bit suspicious about how confident they are about it, right? So I think that it's okay to brag yourself about. That's okay. If you've made a kick-ass beer and you're super proud of it, I think you should shout it from the rooftops. And again, that's that weird, not being from Saskatchewan, there's that weird reserved. It's almost a British thing, is well, we don't want to talk too loudly about how good we are. We'll just let other people talk. Well, no, tell people how good you are. Sometimes that's So that sort of that attitude towards promotion, I think we do strike a reasonable balance. Now, on the comedy side, I'm just so disconnected from the zeitgeist and from popular culture that I rely on you to learn what a meme is, and then I Google, okay, where does this come from? And, yeah, and they're great. They're so much fun, right? So
well, I tried to do some Baby Yoda craft beer memes. Those did okay.
That's the Mandalorian, right? That's yeah. So, which I haven't watched yet, and I'm gonna get there. But
Disney Plus, man, it's worth it. We got a subscription. Fuck, it's worth it.
30 seasons of The Simpsons.
Right.
That alone is worth a subscription cost, right?
You know what I found out? Disney was involved with Bill Nye the Science Guy. They helped present the show, but Bill Nye the Science Guy is not available on Disney Plus.
Is that a contractual thing, you think, or is it?
It's a crying shame, because my little guys, they're right at the age of Bill Nye, and they asked me, well, Dad, what does science have to do with beer? And I'm like, oh, chemistry, son. Like, if you're a chemist, if you have the sciences, you can do more with craft beer. And they're like, oh, okay. And they have this vague sense of that beer is really important to me and it's my job. And if I could tie it into like education in school and science, then I'm like, maybe you'll pay more attention in school because it'll get you to beer.
Well, I mean, just hook them up with Cosmos, Neil deGrasse Tyson's show, and you get them in, even Carl Sagan stuff, and get them to watch Contact and that kind of stuff, because that's a good segue into it. But that's a fun thing. I was Sean Moen from 9 Mile had tweeted today about something to do with the brewery and sort of his experience with starting a craft brewery and running a craft brewery. And one of the things I've always remarked on, or I like to think about one of the things that I notice about craft brewers is that intersect between brewers and creativity. So as you said, I mean, craft brewing there's a massive amount of science. There's exactly the right amount of hops. There's the exact level of the pH level in the water. There's so much science goes in there. It's mind-blowing, and you have to have it exact to be able to replicate it and make the beer taste the same batch to batch. But the creative side to me is super interesting. So you've got musicians and photographers and artists and painters and people who are just super, super creative who drift into this, and they have that kind of weird split brain thing where they're super logical, but they're also insanely creative. And it's a weird thing because, we tend to think of things in left and right brain, that black and white thing that people like in the world, to say that you're either this or you're that. Well, a lot of these people that we're dealing with in the province who are doing these amazing things with beer, they've got both sides of that, where they've got that attention to detail, where they know they need to be able to replicate this day to day, but they're also incredibly creative, and they have all these other interests that are feeding into their, well, I wonder if we do this, what happens if we do that? What if I change that? If I bring this in, what happens if I throw, some hedgehog hair in that thing? There's all these different things that you can do that requires that really off-the-wall, spontaneous, creative brain, and I adore that. I love being around those creative people.
I feel like I have a million more questions to ask you, and we could talk for another couple hours. But for the sake of the audience, I'm going to put a pin in it right here.
Okay.
On a high note.
Well, we can do version 2.
Kevin, thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's been great talking to you.
Rebels, thanks for listening today. I'm going to include links in the show notes so you can find more about the Beer Lovers of Saskatchewan, so you can find Kevin and follow what he's doing on social media and find out all about the craft beer he's excited about. If you have any questions or comments about this episode, be sure to join us on our brand new Facebook group page, The Rebellion Brewing Podcast. I've stopped spamming episode links in Beer Lovers of Saskatchewan, so if you want to find out more about our page for our podcast, you got to come to the Rebellion Brewing Podcast page. I'm also proud to let you know that the Rebellion Brewing Podcast is an affiliate member of the Saskatchewan Podcast Network. If you enjoy this show and are looking for something new to listen to, be sure to check out all the other content, all from Saskatchewan produced people, right here on the SaskatchewanPodcastNetwork.com. There are always new beers coming out all the time. I'm working hard to ensure we feature them on this show. As always, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Untappd so you don't miss out on a single new beer release. Thank you for joining the Rebellion.